My name is Shelly Milan. I am the Vocal Music Department Chair at the Governor's School for the Arts here in Norfolk, Virginia. I've been there for about a decade, but this is my first year as the department chair, and so it's been a fun, wild ride. But there's been a particular subject on my heart since our school is a very diverse group of students, and this is a subject that this year has become so near and dear to my heart. So thank you all. I'm so aware how crazy VANATS is. Most people have to travel quite a bit. They're dealing with hotel rooms or Airbnbs, frantic schedules, students needing books last minute, the whole thing. And so the fact that you're willing to sit here and listen to me talk about something important to me, I'm honored. So thank you. All right. So one of the things, I don't trust technology. And indeed, I did hear that they had a little issue getting started. So I'm okay with you having your phones out. In fact, I'm going to have you all search things rather than me present them. So, and for a couple of reasons. One, chances are your phones work better than technology or are more reliable. And then also, in case you're waiting on any other students' results, you have it right there, and it does not hurt my feelings. I'm secure if you were looking at your phone. And so I kind of have a pretty good feel. We have a nice mixture of high school student, college student, hey, hello, former high school student, teachers, retired teachers. It's a nice game of lovely pianists who happen to know all the vocal repertoire and can be a tech geek when you need one in a pinch. All right, so I wanted to share my story. And also, welcome to anybody who's enjoying from another location. Thank you for joining us, even if it's not in person. So my story, this year I started the year diving into some additional credentials. And my specialization was in identifying giftedness within underrepresented communities. So a little bit about the Governor's School. I think most of you are familiar with it, but it's part of the public school system. So our students do not pay to be part of it. We serve 8 different districts: Norfolk, Virginia Beach, Suffolk, Chesapeake, Portsmouth, Isle of Wight, Franklin, and Southampton County. And so our students go to their regular school in the morning and then come to us for the afternoon, the transportation provided by their school district, and then returned to their school district. So their parents aren't driving them. It's a totally free resource to them. So it's a fabulous program. I'm very passionate about it, but that's for another day. So our funding comes through Gifted Education in Virginia. So my credentials, even though we are arts education, I'm specializing in gifted education. Just a little background. So I started off this year with lots of numbers in my head because I was studying the demographics of those 8 regions. I was looking at race, we were looking at gender, we were looking at socioeconomic status, we were looking at lots of different things. I also threw in English learners and checked out their representation within gifted programming. So I started off with looking at those different districts, and then I moved into looking at our school demographics and to see if our school represented accurately the districts that we were serving, and we weren't. We do a pretty good job of it, but we weren't. And then in addition to that, I started looking at just our department, because our department, yeah, Mr. Fisher, is the only department that has all 8 districts in it. So I looked at the representation within our department, and it was pretty good, but at the same time, I still saw holes. So my September and October were flooded with numbers, and numbers that upset me. In October, I went to the VANATS Conference in New York, and the theme was Voices Rise. And the heart of the entire week was listening for voices that needed to be heard in many different capacities. And with all of the demographics and numbers in my head, combined with the heart of that week, I was an emotional mess. And then, add to it, I went to Porgy and Bess. I mean, so for one thing, Eric Owens as Porgy, so just several months before he had come to Governor's School, and in that master, yes, with Lawrence Brownlee. Mm-hmm. So when you get an email saying, would you like a master class with Lawrence Brownlee and Eric Owens? You say yes, even when you're in tech week of your production. So what happened was, is we had, our leads were not available for the master class. Our understudies were not available for the master class. So it was their babies. And so to watch this larger than life man go nose to nose with a 15-year-old girl and whisper to her artistic wisdom that completely opened her up. And it was, I just will forever have such a soft spot. I know you're getting jealous right now. A soft spot for Eric Owens, because he could have done, make sure you're breathing, work on your interpretation, next. And we would have still loved it because he was in the room. But instead he took such care with each student. So I was so excited to see him live in that capacity. But then additionally, we had 2 grads from our school in the production, Freddie Valentine and Speedo Green. So Freddie was playing Sport and Life, and Speedo was playing Jake. And they were incredible. I know that I'm partial, but they outdid themselves. And so my heart was about to jump out of my chest, a combination of pride and excitement, but then I was just humbled to be part of the program that cultivated this kind of talent. So I had talked to the guys beforehand. I was like, can I come backstage? Can you get me backstage? And of course, they were very gracious and absolutely. So I went backstage, hung out with them. Sidebar, that's very important, Denise Graves. Every gorgeous picture you see of that woman has not been photoshopped. She is every bit as beautiful in person. But she kept photobombing every time we tried to take a picture. So she also has a bit of a sense of humor. Anyway, so I had a great time backstage. And I finally left. It was way too late. Thank God my hotel room was very close by. But I had this sense, hi, welcome. As I went back to my hotel room, with every step I had this sense of a bit of anxiety and even heaviness. And I couldn't identify exactly what it was. But by the time I got to my hotel room, which is Abilene Center, so it was not that far from where we had just been, I realized it was the deep sensation of, after seeing those 2 singers, and also I forgot to mention backstage I had run into Will Liverman and Crystal Williams, who were rehearsing for Akhenaten to be at the Met just after that. Anyway, so I had these amazing young singers in my head and recently in my presence, and I felt this pressure of, am I enough to cultivate the next generation of singers that my predecessor did along with Robert Brown? And they were able to identify such potential and cultivate it to this level, to be taking bows at the Metropolitan Opera. And so that's what started this. And so I stayed up late writing, working on my papers, inspired and upset, and all of those things we feel when we're in those kinds of moments. But I decided to start, I wasn't sure where to start with this. And I started with stories. So if you have not read Ryan Speedo Green's book, Sing for Your Life, make time to read it. It's inspiring. It's absolutely incredible. But music, specifically classical music and opera, at least changed his life. At best, saved his life. He, as a very young man, was put in juvenile detention. He grew up in a very low-income area of Suffolk, Virginia. He actually was put in solitary confinement because he had so much anger and disturbance in his life. And so through opera, he found his identity and his purpose, and now he's singing at the largest stages that our art form has to offer. Anyway, so his story inspired me, but I had a concern that started to pop up as I reread his book. I think sometimes as teachers, we can give ourselves a savior complex. That we see and hear of kids that need help, and we think that we're the solution. So I pondered this idea for a little bit, but then I started talking. I called Will Liverman. I was like, can we talk? So if you're not sure who that is, this is where if you want to look up people, look up Speedo, look up Crystal. She's lovely. But I talked to Will for a long time. I was like, Will, tell me your story. I want to know. I've heard it through your former teachers, but I'd like to hear it from you. He grew up in Virginia Beach, has two wonderful, loving parents. His dad was an elementary school teacher. His mom was a stay-at-home mom. They didn't have anything extra, but he had everything he needed. Played piano at church, and just happened to audition for governor's school. He went in actually for piano. He wanted to be a pianist, and then just decided to go sing the national, I think he said the national anthem is what he sang. A national anthem or Amazing Grace, one of the two, for the panel. And the truth is, music didn't save his life. He was gonna be okay. And so I think sometimes as teachers, we need to be careful not to think that these students need us, but instead, what if we flip the perspective? If Will had not discovered opera, he would not just this past January have been the first man of color to sing Papageno at the Metropolitan Opera. So it's not that when we talk about inclusion and diversity, it's not necessarily about saving lives. Although when that happens, it's a beautiful thing. But that's not the reason we get into this. We do it because we need to, for the sake of history and for the sake of these voices that need to be heard. That's the importance of inclusion. All right. Talked about Will. I wanted to think about 3 different areas, and I think we limit inclusion to the stage, which opera overall I think is doing much better. We have not arrived, but how many people have seen an opera at the Met in HD lately? Right, so you know, the art form is changing. Virginia Opera is changing. We're getting there. It's slowly but surely. I started looking at the numbers within orchestras. They're a little slower, but we're getting there. There was an article recently. Anyway, but we're little by little getting there, but I think we're isolating the focus. So I want you to think back. Pick a show that you went to, whether it was Met in HD, Virginia Opera, Washington National, whatever show you can think of, even at an institution. And I want you to think about your audience. How much diversity was within your audience? And there was a recent study I was reading that discussed the livelihood of an art form isn't necessarily from the stage, although that's an important aspect. But if you look at your audience, when the audience does not match the demographic of the community it's serving, the art dies. Whereas companies who make a distinct effort, hi, come on in, a distinct effort to diversify their audience, to reach out to different people groups within their communities, those are the places that are thriving and thriving longer and stronger. Now, don't misunderstand this. I think it's important to say those that have been lifelong supporters of opera, they're vital. And so this is not instead of those foundational people who have loved and supported this art form for decades and even within several generations, hundreds of years, but it's in addition to. Not instead of, but in addition to. All right, so I want you to take a moment. I want you to think about, so we've got a mixture of students, teachers, combination thereof. I want you to take a moment and think about either your classrooms, your studios, or the audience that you were last in when you went to see an opera, and consider how much diversity is within that. And so open your eyes when you've really thought through that. And the question is, well, I'm not trying to be an exclusive, elitist, Eurocentric teacher. Nobody's trying to do that. At least I hope not. It's awfully scary. But how do we move beyond that? How do we take this art form and make it something that is interesting and thriving within communities besides the ones that have grown up with it? Any answer? It's complex, right? Because, I mean, if you have grown up with gospel, how do you transition to opera? It's not a natural transition. And so that's one of the things I've been trying to consider. So, one of the things that we've specifically, and I want to discuss it, how we're doing it at the governor's school, but then I want that to be an impetus for how can we make that in other places? How can that exist in other areas? So one of the things that we've been doing very purposefully is how we approach auditions. So just recently we finished auditions, and the poor kids that auditioned are getting their notice today of whether they got in. But a bunch of them sang Carmen Ben, and they were very well prepared, beautifully prepared. They did a great job. They represented themselves very well. But there were a handful of kids that beat them out. They came in singing Amazing Grace. And it's not, I think as teachers we need to be careful that we're not talking about inclusion like we are dumbing down our art form. Instead, what it is I'm listening for potential over preparation. And that's a different thing. And so it's not that I'm feeling bad for the pitiful kid who came in just singing the national anthem. I heard more potential in that national anthem than I did in that very well-prepared Carmen Ben. So, can I mess with you, Sunny?
Yes.
All right. So this is going to be a little bit of a demonstration, and I know most people in this room are not doing auditions with high schoolers, but this is what I know, and so that I'd love to figure out how it might apply to what it is that you are doing. But it's unfair for me to tell you how to do what you do when you know what you do much better than I do. All right, so Sunny came as an 8th grader. Sunny, and so she's going to pretend to be back in her 8th grade self. Sunny is currently a junior, but we're going to talk to 8th grade Sunny. Sunny, where are you currently singing? Do you sing in your chorus at school, or are you singing at your church? Where are you singing?
I sing at my church.
Sing at your church. So what style are you mostly singing?
Gospel all the time.
Gospel all the time. Awesome. Okay. So you've never sung in your middle school chorus?
No.
Okay. What other questions was I going to ask you, Sunny? All right. So Sunny, what would you like to sing for us?
Amazing Grace.
Awesome. Now, Sunny, do you read music?
No, not at all.
Okay. Do you read things by ear?
Yes.
Okay. Cool. All right.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
And for us to mess with, I want to do this like you guys are the adjudicators. Did you hear potential in that?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But did you hear, let me change the lens, did you hear classical potential in that?
Mm-hmm.
It's hard, what do you listen to?
Yeah, for sure. The strength and the stamina.
There's natural power,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Definite beauty of a different sound.
Right. And so and this is what I did a lot with the kids that came in singing the national anthem, or Amazing Grace, or Beyonce. That happened. Like, okay, if I'm too old to know the song, how do we work with that? Do you know Amazing Grace? I can work with that. So Miss Daniel, can we take it up a little bit? Maybe Travis, we were in D. Let's go up one step.
Amazing grace.
Sunny, here, this is my fault. And so I try to make sure I explain to the student when we're doing this that you did nothing wrong. We're playing now. We're just experimenting. We're seeing what your voice can do. What you're doing is awesome. There is nothing wrong with it. We're just playing around with other ideas. So I want to mess with you a little bit. Sunny, do you know what vibrato is?
Yes.
Okay, what is it?
It's like when your voice.
That little. Yeah. All right. So I don't want you to make vibrato, but I want you to. I'm hearing it in little spots. Can you allow it whenever it comes?
Okay.
Okay. And do you know what chest voice and head voice is?
No.
Okay. So where you're singing right now is chest voice, that very strong area. It's where you speak. So if I'm going to take it up, and I'm curious I just want to hear what your head voice sounds like. So can we go to G? And I want you to try to find a higher place in your voice. Also, we're going to allow vibrato. I want you to think, rather than having your words sound like your speech, I want you to think very tall.
Okay.
Okay, and we're just experimenting. Can I hear that, please?
Amazing
that's the transition we do. And I'm going to tell you, there was one kid that walked in this past year, and girlfriend had a 1,000,000-watt smile. She was in power red suit. I was like, oh, please be awesome. And she opened up and had the biggest belt I had heard. I was like, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to find that classical voice. Started messing around. Nope, girlfriend's a belter. It was like, there was no, I was like, can you go downstairs to the music theater department because they need to hear you. And so this does not always work, but what we're doing is we're trying to change how we're listening. All right, Sunny, can we go even higher? I'm just curious, and so what I want you to do, maybe just up to 1. Yeah. Can you, now that we played with your classical voice, a little bit, your head voice, can you support it the same way that you were when you were in your chest voice, singing it more gospel style? I want you to keep thinking open, but at this time I want you to trust it a little bit more and support it a little bit more. Okay?
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
Good. And so clearly that's not exactly how she sounded as an 8th grader, but you can hear the progression. And so she's been with us for 2.5 years. Sunny, do you now read music?
Yes.
Yes, because she's a bright girl. She had just never been exposed. And so that's one of the things that we talk a lot about when in our classrooms. When you go to college, there'll be other kids who are likely as talented as you. There'll be other kids who probably sing as well as you. Maybe some that sing better. But the difference is you've had an opportunity. And I think throughout this whole thing, that's the key word, is what opportunities are we creating for people who might have a giftedness within this area that are just not being cultivated yet. So, as a little treat, I was going to save this for the end. Sunny, could you sing a little bit? And a funny story with Sunny. Her entire first year, her lessons looked. Can I do a Sunny impression?
Sure.
Okay. So what was your first song? Do you remember? Ultrasate di Piacarmi. It was a lot of, I'm so not sure about you crazy white people. Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong.
I mean, I don't think Girlfriend smiled the entire year. And it was just lots of, I don't know about you. And now she's one of our foundational kids, and we have high expectations for her. Sunny, what are you planning on going? I know you're a junior, but what are you planning on doing after high school?
I want to be an opera singer. I plan on auditioning for Juilliard, Curtis, Mannes, and North Carolina School for the Arts.
Cool. And so one of those things, but here's the truth though. Sunny, were you likely to have, Sunny, I'm going to tell a little more story on you. Sunny has 2 amazing parents. Supportive, loving family. Sunny would have been okay without us. She didn't need opera. But I feel like our little operatic world, needed Sunny to find it. And so that's really the heart of the inclusion. Do you want to sing with Jamil Macklebane? Do you want mother for that?
Second.
We'll just do one verse.
Okay. Mi sembra senza lui triste un'innoco. Notte mi sembra il giorno, mi sembra gelo e fuoco.
of this, and I am adamant about us ending right on time. I want to facilitate, because I don't think this is, how many of you have been part of a conversation of how opera or classical music seems to be rather elitist or not very inclusive?
I don't think it's like not an elite thing. I think it's more of a, because I'm a gospel singer too.
Yeah.
It's more like I wasn't exposed to it.
Well, that, exactly.
So with not being exposed to it, it's not my, like, my parents have always told me, you know, I can sing anything.
Right.
So I don't think it's like an elite thing. I think it's more of a not being exposed to it. People around me not saying, hey, like, you need this for training. I think that's what it is. I don't think it's an elite thing.
Well,
Well, for
sorry,
me.
and let me rephrase. I don't think it is, because no teacher singing is trying to make it elite. We would happily teach anybody who shows giftedness and interest, right? But so how do we make it more accessible?
I think yeah. Okay, so
Yeah.
where we're from, like, we're from places that they don't take music seriously. So with that being said,
When you say they, do you mean school systems?
school
do you
systems,
what do you mean?
like
Okay.
people, like
Our
what's
environment.
taken seriously is sports.
Okay.
So when we get to
yeah.
sports, and then you have the people like us who want to pursue music,
Yeah,
we don't get exposed to the things that we need to get exposed to.
absolutely.
So it's mainly about kind of balancing sports and music and all
Yeah.
the other things. So I think that's what it is. I'm not scared of classical.
Right.
It's not my favorite, but it's like we weren't exposed to it. So if
Right.
I'm not exposed to it, I'm not gonna reach out about it. You know what I'm
Right.
saying?
Right.
So it's definitely about exposure. Yeah, putting those people who are in these genres and putting them in the school systems and stuff like that.
So yes.
I think another thing about it is it's easier to want to do something if you see someone that either looks like you, comes from the same place as you.
Correct.
You can see them doing it. And I know me, even like now, I see people that look like me doing it, but it's not really a lot or enough, you know. So that's a big part of it, is seeing what you want to do being done.
And I talked to a student, she's in her she's finishing up her master's at Cincinnati. She went to North Carolina School for the Arts for undergrad. But she talked about, in her first year, her freshman year, she was a good singer. She had never sung classically before, but she was solid. She really was. She came in, but she talked about, I gave her an assignment, because that's what we do, a lot of listening. But one of them, I was like, I want you to go listen to 10 different recordings of Regressed. And so she came back, and it actually wasn't until she was getting her master's that she said what a moment that was. She was like, but that was the moment where this became something that I was learning about that was fun to something I could become. And she said, not that I didn't love working with you, not that I didn't love Mr. Fisher, but when I saw a woman who looked like me on a stage I'd never imagined, it gave me a new realm of possibilities. And so that was just an assignment. So, because she has a very similar voice type to Regressed. Anyway, yes.
Another thing. When I got to GSA, I looked like around, and there were other students that looked like me. However, it's like when you can see, I don't know how I'm trying to word this, but for example, everybody knows, I knew who Leontine Price was before I came to governor's school, just because who doesn't know who Leontine Price is? But I didn't think, like when I got there, I was afraid of it because I never saw someone that looked like me actually accomplish. I didn't even know it was a thing, honestly, for people that look like me that did, because honestly in my community, it was cliche to want to be an opera singer, you know? So I think that even having a more diverse classroom, because it's one thing, like Ms. Milan was saying, it's nice to study with my classmates, but especially when my classmates that look like me, we're encouraging each other, and we're setting an example for each other. That also helps a lot, and I think that would help a lot just to have more inclusive classrooms.
Shelly, can I say something?
Absolutely.
That's one of the things that I love about teaching at Thomas Nelson, is because, I can just say that all three of my gals, they were, I would say, a little bit scared when I introduced them to some classical music.
Right.
And, but you're looking at two people who are in their second semester of voice lessons who wanted to do this, and they're all doing they all did classical.
That's awesome.
And Sophia, yes, she's had more experience performing, but the point I'm making is that, just like you're saying, exposure and getting the opportunity to just experience it. And I think that because so many of us, we teachers grew up performing and got exposed to it, to be able to introduce it to someone else, it's just like us learning gospel music and getting to teach it. And it's, it's all of the whole thing all together.
If only I could sing gospel as well as study.
Yeah.
But she can help. My husband does.
There you go.
Oh, yeah, he does.
Absolutely. So I was going to say this for the very end, but maybe this will open up the last part. So one of the things I went to, and if you want to look these people up later, they are worth following. They're absolutely incredible. But Freddie Valentine, who played Sport and Life in Porgy and Bess's production, there's one more show tomorrow, right? Right, I think it's the last one. If you've not seen it, you want to see it. It's absolutely mesmerizing. Ryan Speedo Green, I didn't hear back, but that's okay. Crystal Williams, he's in Vienna. Will was the one I talked to the longest about this. Like, what is the one thing that had the biggest impact on you as far as wanting to pursue this? What was the thing that took the limitations off? And it was interesting, I wrote down some of the answers. And some of the things have already been said because I think there's truth in them and some things that we don't really think about. But one of them was having access to a mentor who looked like me. Doesn't mean that was the only person who was influential, but it took off limitations. Another one was being part of a culture of inclusivity and inclusion. Another one, watching performances that had many different people from many different backgrounds featured. And then the one I mentioned, seeing a person on stage that looked like me changed what I was studying to what I was becoming. And then this one, because I was like, okay, I can't change what I am. I can't be a woman of color to inspire my young women of color. I can't be what I'm not. But this one, I was like, I can do this. But having an advocate, knowing that when I'm worried about whether or not I am enough, I have someone I can call and say, you're not, just keep doing what you're doing. And so that's one of those things that I'm like, okay, so when I keep in touch, and Mr. Fisher does this a lot, I know Mary Matthews does this, Karen Hoy, lovely teacher, but being the person that when different students who have moved on beyond our studios are worried about whether they are enough, being that advocate says yes you are. And also, so some of the things I'm trying to, and this is where I would love to hear any advice you have. Audiences, exposure, how do we take this art form and make it more accessible? That's hard. Tickets cost money.
People like food.
They do.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things I'm personally working on. So we did how our programming works. We did a leader Abend in the beginning of the year. We did a Mall in the Night Visitors. And then we just finished our cabaret. And now we're starting Cendrillon by Viardot, not Massenet. Don't worry. Don't get nervous for us. But I'm trying to ponder ways of reaching school districts, kind of going back to my initial study of how do I get those districts that are coming from lower income areas or areas that don't have funding for, I have a kid who, when she auditioned, she had never been in chorus, not because she chose not to, because her school doesn't have chorus. How does she compete against a kid who's in a program who teaches her solfege?
Mm-hmm.
She came in singing Beyonce, we heard potential. What do you do with that? It's not, I mean, it's just simply not fair. Now, luckily, we heard enough potential that we took her in, and she was one of them that I wrote about in those credentials that I was talking about at the beginning. I said, okay, I made her fake name for my writing was Trinity. I said, okay, Trinity, how serious are you? I'm very serious. How much do you want to be here? I really want to be here. I'm really glad to be here. Like, okay, here's your chance to prove it. So here's your first voice lesson, and she was ready to sing some Beyonce.
Yes.
I was like, okay, that's really nice, and you're really good at it. Here's your first classical piece. Can you read music? No. Okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to play the piano part. And then I'm going to play, so we did that recording. And then I'm going to play the melody for you. Did that recording. Here's the sheet music I want you to follow when you're listening to it. And here, I gave her a recording of Kathleen Battle and Jesse Norman. I was like, I want you to sound like neither of them. Do not imitate these ladies. They are older than you by a lot and have been doing this a long time, but this is the style I want you to do it. Because if we did an English piece to start with, I was like, I'm going to see you every day this week. I want you to show me how fast you can learn this. And so, girlfriend learned it overnight. I said, you have the week. I want you to try to learn it as fast as you can. She memorized it overnight and asked if she could perform it for the group.
Jesus.
So, in those initial writings I was talking about, how we miss giftedness. This kid had actually potentially been labeled as low performing. But that's because on tests and even in competitions, sometimes we don't see the bigger picture. And so when I was studying her, I pegged two main key components of her giftedness. Her giftedness was within motivation. I mean, besides her God-given talent, she had a gorgeous voice, has a gorgeous voice, and her skill to memorize. And so even though she did not have the training, she could rely on her ability to be very motivated and to prove something, as well as her skill to memorize, which I don't have that skill, not like that. And since then, we've had some bumps in the road because theory's hard.
Oh.
I mean, if you've not grown up with that, it can be a major stumbling block. So she's working. History, some of that stuff is rough when you have kids who have been taught it since 6th grade. But she's doing it, and we keep relying on that motivation. Anyway, so it's just opening up what are different ways of allowing that talent and that gift to manifest. But what we're doing too, trying to get slick. So that poor young woman drives an hour each way from where she goes to school in the morning for science, math, English, and whatever I'm missing, social studies. And then she takes a bus that takes a full hour to get to us, stays with us until 5 o'clock, and then takes the hour drive back. So that's not a lot of homework time, not a lot of family time. And so whenever we have productions, like this is a family thing. Let's see if we can get her family supporting what it is she's doing, she'll stay motivated. So we started, I'm like, whenever your grandparents can come, they have a free ticket. If they want to go to Virginia Opera, we'll get them a ticket. If they want to go Met and HD, I've got a ticket for them. But they've become an amazing support system, not just for this young lady, but for the school. I can't help but I can't tell you how many, and you probably could name quite a few, how many parents start off never having listened to an opera or gone to an opera, who, after their students are long gone, college and beyond, we see at the opera. Because through their student, they fell in love with it. And so they become huge supporters of opera and this program. So anyway, I promised I was going to stay on time, and so therefore I am. But if you would like to talk, if you have inspiration for me, because this is an area that I'm just exploring. Also, I have a next round of my credentials this semester That last semester was working on identifying giftedness within underrepresented communities. This semester, it's on how to cultivate an environment where underrepresented communities can thrive in gifted education. So if you have enlightenment, please share it with me because I'm over my head. But please consider ways of diversifying your audiences, diversifying your studios, not for the sake of being anyone's savior, but for the sake of allowing these voices that must be heard and should be heard to be heard. Thank you.